I'm Hank Perritt. I'm the Dean of Chicago-Kent College of Law, and I would like to welcome you to Chicago-Kent and to Illinois Institute of Technology. This is going to be a great program, and I'd like to tell you just a little bit about where I think this fits in the rapidly developing process of the automation of legal education in the United States and elsewhere. The Center for Computer-Assisted Legal Instruction has been around for a long time. Its first efforts, in fact, were aimed at making computerized legal instruction available through mainframe computers even before the days of time sharing. The idea was that you'd dial up a mainframe computer somewhere in another state, and you'd stay online, and you'd be able to work these lessons, and everybody was very excited about this highfalutin use of technology. Well, we've come a long way since then, and I've had the privilege of being involved in some of the way that we have come. I served for a number of years as a member of the board of directors of Cali and was vice president of Cali for several years, and so I know how much a couple of individuals have contributed to the uses of technology and the technological tools that we all now benefit from. Two of the most important people in that regard are in this room, and one of them is going to be presiding over this program. One is Tom Bruce from Cornell, who's up in the balcony. Stand up, Tom. Tom was one of the first people who recognized the importance of some sort of conversation among law schools, and he organized initially a listserv, and then helped people get the idea for the first one of these conferences as a way for people, and initially the people who were the focus of this were people who were in charge of technology in law schools, so that they could compare notes and learn from each other as to how to push the leading edge of technology in law schools forward. And all of us, I think, owe quite a lot to Tom for having the initial idea and for being effective enough to persuade other people to buy into his idea. The other person to whom we owe a lot is John Mayer, who's the current executive director of Cali. Before that, he was in charge of the Center for Law and Computers at Chicago-Kent. Chicago-Kent and Cali go back a long way together. John did a lot to put Chicago-Kent on the map as the computer law school and a law school that prides itself on being a pioneer and helping people understand the relationship between computers and law. And since he's been executive director of Cali, Cali has taken on a new life in terms of its creativity and its energy, in terms not only of generating new kinds of computerized instructional materials for law professors and law students, but also for taking this conference to a new level. The first instance of this conference was in 1991. It had a good turnout, 70 people. Almost everyone who came was a computer professional, consistent with Tom Bruce's idea that computer professionals needed to share ideas across law school boundaries. This year, there are 450 of you, and 100 of you, John tells me, are law professors. What that signifies is that what 7 years ago was a kind of novel idea, opened to question and doubt in some quarters as to whether computers would have any impact on legal education, has now become a mainstream activity. So we no longer are talking about specialized professionals at the margin of law schools, talking to each other about the problems they have in getting anyone to take them seriously. What we're talking about now is revolutionizing legal education with the benefit of these technologies. And this conference consistently has been important in helping us share ideas about where we've been, what we've done effectively, what hasn't worked, and where we ought to be going in the future. This year builds on that tradition, and I know that all of you will benefit from the many different opportunities that you have in the multiple tracks. I'd just like to emphasize a couple of things that might be worth keeping in mind as you go through the substantive sessions in the conference. First of all, with respect to where we've been. We started, as I suggested a moment ago, in trying to think about how mainframe computers and low-speed telephone connections might be used to supplement legal education. Then we went through the PC revolution, which decentralized computing power, and more significantly, in terms of our experience as legal educators and legal education support people, it gave everybody in our community a high degree of autonomy in terms of using the technology. No longer did people have to be prisoners of decisions made by the people who control the mainframe computer and the telephone lines. More recently came the Internet. Initially, the Internet, like computers in general, was thought to be perhaps at the margin, and there were even doubters about whether it ever would have a major impact on the way people did things. Well, there aren't many doubters anymore. Most people accept the proposition, and I think the content of this conference last year and this year reflects acceptance of the proposition that the Internet is the new virtual classroom and is the new virtual law school. And so as we think about how best to deploy technology and how best to change what we do in the classroom, in the hallways, and the corridors of our law schools, we ought to be thinking about how we do it on the Internet. That's appropriate because the Internet is decentralized and therefore enhances the autonomy that the PCs gave us. The Internet's important because it is layered or unbundled, and what that permits each of us to do is to specialize on the things we do best, able to take for granted that the other things that are necessary in terms of transport and networking and browser software will be done by somebody else. Third, and potentially most important, it's open. And that means that we're not imprisoned by some proprietary standard. There is, I think, acceptance of that proposition, but we're still working hard to understand how we make most effective use of the Internet. I'd like to talk about two other newer phenomena that I think should shape our thinking about the future. One of those made its appearance in a major way last year at this conference and will be built upon this year, and that's distance learning. And the other is the convergence of transport technologies. Distance learning has been around for a long time. In a sense, whenever you get a Cali exercise from the Cali web server, you're engaging in a low level of distance learning because stuff's been put together here or somewhere else and packaged up on a web server in Chicago, and you get it through the Internet into your computers, and then you make it available to your law students, often through some other forms of distance learning when the law students dial into your system or come into your system through the Internet. Distance learning also has been around a long time at IIT and a few other places in the form of real-time analog video. You take a class and you broadcast it simultaneously via a private television network to some remote sites. That's been around for a long time. And lots of people know how to do that and to do it pretty well. If you've ever been to a Barbary course, as most of you that are members of the bar have been, you know that that kind of distance learning has been used by Barbary and other bar preparation institutions for a long time. That's not what we ought to be thinking about anymore when we think about distance learning. What we now can think about is a rich combination of distance learning tools and media, all integrated through the web. So that distance learning now means a combination of full motion video delivered through the web, just as what I'm doing and saying right now is being delivered in full motion video through the web. Audio, whether in the form of clips or real-time audio. Textual and static graphic material, such as we're all familiar with from browsing websites. Web-based discussion groups, and if somebody wants, web-based chat rooms. Now, that mixture of distance learning possibilities opens up a number of important things for us. First of all, it breaks the notion that distance learning has to be synchronous. It's not necessary anymore for everybody to be tuned in at the same time. That's helpful in a couple of ways. If you're going to do distance learning between here and China, as we expect to be doing at Chicago Kent as early as next spring, you don't want the Chinese or us to have to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in order to participate. Not only that, as the patterns, as the lifestyles of law students change, it may be both important from a marketing standpoint and appropriate from an educational standpoint to open up some time-shifting options, not only for law students, but also for professors. But most important of all, people learn in different ways, and good teachers teach in different ways. And when we have this richer mixture of tools for distance learning, it makes it possible to expand the learning opportunities for a more diverse body of law students, and it makes it possible for us as teachers to teach in the way that we think we will do it best. We are just at the frontier of exploring the uses of these new tools. People know how to package all this stuff together on a website. That's a technological issue, and it's well within our capability now, and by the way, well within the bandwidth that almost all of us have available on our desktops at home as well as in law schools. Bandwidth is not a problem, not even if you want to do it from here to China. What still lies ahead of us is to understand as educators how best to use these technologies. Do we want to replicate what goes on in the classroom, or do we want to put that aside and ask deeper questions about the law school educational process and figure out how to use these tools perhaps to escape some constraints that in the past have not made it possible to do everything we wanted to do in the classroom, in the study group, in the final examination at the end of the semester. That is a huge opportunity for us as legal educators. And I encourage you to embrace that opportunity to figure out what distance learning should mean for us beginning today, tomorrow, and Saturday as you go through this conference. The second major future-oriented issue has to do with changes in transport, or if you prefer, signaling techniques. We had a conference here on May 5th as a part of our Institute for Science, Law, and Technology called Network Convergences. It wasn't about cable and telephone getting together. What it was about was the absorption of public switched telephone systems around the world into the Internet, and the collapse of the boundaries that formerly have separated wire and cable-based communication from wireless communication. And everybody who participated in that conference, ranging from the CEO of Ameritech right down to the most enthusiastic proponent of IP technology for the Internet, everybody agreed that in a couple of years, maybe 5 years, when you look at the phone system or when you look at the Internet, you're going to be looking at the same thing. And probably what you're going to be looking at is an IP-based network, in other words, an Internet-like network that moves packets around through routers. And on top of that will be voice and video and text and conversations and email. Now, nobody knows yet whether the providers of this new kind of service are going to be the phone companies or the cable companies or today's Internet service providers or maybe somebody else. Everybody's struggling over that. That's what the AT&T-TCI merger is about, in large part, what the WorldCom America Online merger is about, in large part. But that can make a big difference to us when what we now think of as our telephone line is in effect an Internet and a World Wide Web, a multimedia World Wide Web dial tone, because it will make it so much easier for us to do things like distance learning without having to do a lot of extra technological work to shoehorn what we want to do through the Internet into a circuit-switched voice telephone system. The other part of this network convergences issue is perhaps of even more profound consequence. And that has to do with the collapse of the boundaries between wired and wireless. Much long-distance internet communication now, and as well as voice communication and television signals, go by way of satellite. That's a wireless technology because it really wouldn't be feasible to run a wire up to the satellite in geosynchronous orbit 22,500 miles up. So it's not too remarkable to talk about the satellite communication as having an impact, except that some of the traditional distinctions between satellite channels and terrestrial channels are beginning to be abandoned, especially in the regulatory arena. But what is particularly significant is what's happening in the local loop and the metropolitan area network arena with wireless. Under the new wireless LAN standard, the 802.11 standard that was adopted by the international organizations about a year ago, it now is possible with $10,000 worth of equipment or less to do data communications, internet or LAN communication, over a distance of about 10 kilometers at 128 to 256 kilobits per second, anywhere within that radius. And in fact, in some countries where wired communication is a problem, like Bosnia, where I have some recent experience, the international community is using this wireless LAN technology all over the place, not just for LANs, this is the important part, but for communication over much larger distances. What the cellular telephone people are doing, and their suppliers like Motorola, are working with new kinds of technologies, especially spread spectrum technology, that greatly increase the kind of bandwidth that will be available to us for data communication. And so I think it's reasonable to expect within the next, say, 3 years, that we will have available to us off-the-shelf consumer products that will make us, as law professors and legal education support people, essentially indifferent to whether we have wired connections or wireless connections, and different both in terms of capability and in terms of cost. Think what that'll do for you in terms of how you configure student connections to your network within your law school. Think what that will do for you in terms of distance learning. Not only will the law student be able to get into the website containing this rich mixture of new educational tools from home or from a place in the law school, but he or she can do it in her car or on the commuter train on which he's riding. Or if it's a part-time law student who travels in her job, she can do it from Libya, if that's where she happens to be. So we must make sure that we continue to have distant horizons as we contemplate how best to use technology in legal education. And just as the best of us had our eyes on the PC, even when the norm was to use mainframe computers, and just as the best of us had our eyes on the Internet, when the norm was to use proprietary electronic bulletin board software and direct dial-up connections, now the best of us will have our eyes on distance learning in the web package and this convergence among different transport technologies. I think you're going to have a great time, and what's more important is I'm confident that you will continue to be leaders in this important technologically driven revolution of legal education, and we're proud to be a part of that. Thanks a lot.